The Kodi Greene effect is real.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers, but first, just a quick reminder, as the everydayers know, wherever you're getting this, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure you click that subscribe button, click that little bell as well, so you don't miss when we post a new video. Leave us a like, comment down below as well. If you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review. It all does help us out a lot. And make sure you follow us on social media, wherever you're on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We're on all those places at Locked On Huskies, so shoot us a follow over there. Lars, like I said, real fun show coming out. Talking about practice 10, which was a little bit slower today. So, a couple notes that we'll get to at the very end there. Got to talk to the running backs, which was a lot of fun. We got to spend a lot of time on recruiting. We're talking about how Washington keep the momentum from Kodi Greene's commitment rolling. Maybe throw some predictions in there, but we've seen it already. The effect of him committing to Washington is very, very real.
I mean, number-wise, I think they jumped up to number 15, or they jumped up 15 spots in On3's ranking. So when we talked about, hey, what does this do? You get to move up a couple of spots. No, you're moving up. You're basically doubling your class almost in a way. And that's why we talk about when Jedd stressed the importance of high school recruiting, this was the product of result. This is why you don't go into the transfer portal like the school down south does and, replenish the room and then also say, hey, we're going to sign these high school kids and then never develop them. Washington is like, hey, we just needed a couple of guys as a stopgap, Carver and Guerin. Everything else is on the table for the guys to come in next season for the 2026 class and say, come earn it. And this is a perfect example of a guy who sees that playing time, gets to play with his brother, which, as we've talked about, is becoming brother you now. The Coleman Brewster brothers potentially now. Maybe that's another effect where you're talking about a guy who's also considering Oregon, from the state of Washington ties, all those sorts of things. This is a guy where, especially at this point, this is, I think, the major kind of effect of it is you don't wait until signing day or flip him before signing day. That's a cool thing in its own right. But the fact that Jedd, Fisch, and Marcus Griffin, Michael Switzer, Mike Brewster, you go on down the list. Probably, let's be real, the entire staff should get credit for this one. So it's not
they
just
absolutely do, yeah.
one guy. And then obviously Jedd, Fisch. You look at it and say, okay, you know what? Everything is there. Let's do it now, because that's a big swing to get this now. Even though Oregon fans say, hey, well, never say never. It's like, yeah, but you don't do this. This is foundational. I'm going to be the first guy that plants his flag, not be the Buddha where you do it right before signing day. I'm going to do it now and say, hey, you know what? Come to Washington. Washington's actually the right place, because if you want to come out of high school, this is the place to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Where that's a really great point. And that's such a big part of this, right? Where you mentioned Derek Coleman Brusa. I want to talk about another defensive lineman in that same light who, shortly after that happened, Anthony Jones gets a crystal ball from On3's Chad Simmons to pick Washington, where he had named Tennessee his leader in January. He's down to Tennessee, Washington, and UCLA. And it goes back to a conversation you and I were having on yesterday's show of signing a big, deep, talented defensive line class. And if you're able to get a commitment from him where he's got a commitment scheduled for June 23rd, maybe he pushes that up now with this crystal ball. Who knows how that's going to work out. But it's something to monitor, especially ahead of this weekend of official visits, right? Where, Brian Bonner is the one that I'm going to be keeping a very, very close eye on in this regard, where it's just another one of those guys where Scotty Graham's throwing out some cryptic tweets. We're not going to read into that one way or another, because that's a show in its own right, where you and I have our cryptic tweet conversations off air that are so much fun. But this is just one of those ones where you look at it and you say, all right, you see how well this all fits together. And now Kodi, who obviously, yes, from the state of Washington, you and I have discussed this, but is now a top 5 player in California. You and I talked about, what that Brady Smigel effect could look like. Now with Kodi Greene making that commitment, being a 5-star top 25 player in the country, we're seeing that. We're seeing kids take notice and say, yeah, if Kodi wants to go to Washington, I'm absolutely going to make sure that I'm keeping them in consideration.
And let's also give a testament to the old-fashioned flip. This is an actual flip. He was still committed to Oregon. This isn't like Bob Mulatalo, where Washington's clearly in that class where you're able to get the upper echelon guys, be able to compete for them. But traditionally, prior to Jedd Fisch, you would get a couple of them, but it really seems like under Jedd, you are getting the guys you want to get. Now, again, you're never going to get every one. Even, look at any school down the list. Nobody gets every single guy that they want. Nick Saban, maybe back in the day. But beside that point, you look at Jedd saying, like, you know what? We need to go get a premium tackle. We need to go get a top-tier running back again to pair with Hansen. Let's go and get these guys, bring them all in. And now I think that California wave that we, speaking of hints, that tweet again, it's amazing what Twitter does. And I'm going to call it Twitter because I'm going to do it that way.
Because it is.
But yeah, that's one of those where we talked about the California wave. Another guy, Van Spafford, where you're talking about all these other schools that are, Georgia, Tennessee, all these schools. And Washington seems to, trending to be the choice. That's a major statement for Jedd Fisch, where he's coming off a 6-7 season. Like, just imagine, we're recording this on the night of the NFL draft, where it's like, imagine if McMillan had, come up to Washington and been the opposite of Denzel, and his numbers have looked better, and, maybe you get a couple more wins or whatnot. Because I think this fall, this recruiting class seems to be building or kind of coinciding with a wave that's coming on the field, and we've seen that at practice, which we'll talk about later. But everything is kind of just trending in Washington's favor right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where, let's spend a minute here on Derek Coleman-Brusa, where we both said his name, but I think that's the one where people's attention is going to turn. Where, there are a couple of guys we'll bring up a little later, like Mason James, like probably talk about Brian Bonner again. But I look at Derek Coleman-Brusa, and now he is that next big domino, right? Where it's one of the things that he mentioned why he was considering Oregon so heavily was he wanted to play around a top flight recruiting class. And now it's, hey, now that really big piece is in place at Washington, plus a 4-star quarterback in Derek Zammit, plus, whatever else might be coming down the pipeline. And again, it's not like he didn't like Washington before. We know that he has been very, very high on the Huskies for a long time. But now it's just kind of, is this what is really going to put Washington over the top? Is the fact that all that momentum really is flowing in the right direction, because that's important. And that's something that kids want to be a part of. And, you look at the junior day list. It's why you and I spent so much time talking about it. It's seeing all of these big names come on campus and just be around each other. And you see how they all gravitate towards each other and say, hey, maybe I didn't know this kid, or maybe I, heard about him and seen him play before, but never really got a chance to talk to him. Now it's, oh yeah, no, that's somebody that I could see myself playing with at the next level. And, Kodi is one of those kids where I'm sure Derek and him have some kind of relationship, both being from the state of Washington. So these are all things that certainly matter in the long run and could end up putting Washington where you and I talked about them potentially being last year, which didn't happen, with a top 15 class.
Yeah. And I mean, when you think about it, when you look at Derek, it's like the brother you thing, where when I talked to Kodi Greene a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago now, at the U Village, by the way, go check that out on Locked On Huskies, where he talked about, like, I grew up, going to Huskies games with my family, all of us were just, that was like everything. We grew up wanting to do it. And now you finally have the opportunity. And as I was listening back to the interview today, I kind of thought, I'm like, you could honestly just cut this and say Kodi said it, because it's the exact same thing. And with Derek,
yeah,
it's, yes, you could go down south a little bit, but, Lowen's right here, the family's right here. I'm sure the Hatchet family came back, hey, Guerin did go to Oklahoma for 1 year, and he was okay. It was okay, but he ended up coming back, played with his brother one more time. It's easier to make that trip to Montlake than it is having to every other week go from one school to another school and
right.
Divide up your attention. And by the way, you're still going to get good coaching. You're still going to it's like everything is there. So it's not a hard sell to be like, well, hey, like, just stay home. Put on for the hometown. It's no like. There's almost no reason not to when you look at all the resources that are available, the playing time, Jason Kapusi, that edge room is going to need to get replenished. And by the way, like, I'm sure Lowen and Derek would like to go against each other a couple of times to practice. That'd be fun.
Oh, absolutely. Lars, last thing, you mentioned it very well before we move on here. That video that Kodi Greene put out announcing his commitment and everything, that was really cool. It's one of those special moments that I'm sure it resonates with every Husky fan. And if you haven't got a chance to check that out, go check it out on his social media. But Lars, we got to talk about how Washington can keep this momentum going. right after a message from our friends over at Fire TV. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, you can watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. And you can play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of a console. If you already have a console, a Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take your or your kids' games on the road wherever you plug in. It's great news for me. If I'm going to be on the road this football season, I just want to make sure that I can play some Call of Duty, drop into Verdansk, and have a good time with that. Head to Amazon.com/FireTV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices including Fire TV Stick 4K, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, and Fire TV Cube. So, Lars, the question is, how can Washington keep this momentum going? And I'm going to throw out a name here to start that I saw on the field today on an unofficial visit at Washington. That's 4-star defensive lineman Khary Wilder.
Another guy from J. Sierra with a good, correct me if I'm wrong on that, right? But he's from Sierra?
Yeah, he's from Sierra North. For people who that was on me last time. I messed that one up. Yeah, Sierra North in Los Angeles. Yes.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to clarify because I know every now and then people are like, hey, that's not okay, cool. But no, that's another one where we talk about, again, kind of just expanding on the Cali wave, where you look and you're going to need multiple edges, where we kind of threw it out, talked about, I think, either yesterday or the day before, where it's how many edges do you end up taking? Look at the NFL draft this year. Look at what the New York Giants did. You just drafted Abdul Carter, picked up the 5th-year option on Kayvon Thibodeau. You just need a multitude of guys that you can just rotate in like a hockey line. Anytime you can get 3 or 4, 4 stars, because Anthony Jones is another one that you mentioned in the last segment, where again a guy where kind of in that. Now it's terrible to bring up in hindsight, but the Brady example where kind of just a guy where it always seems like he was going to end up at Washington. Obviously, I think for separate reasons Brady didn't work out, just on timing. But you look at between UCLA and Tennessee, like Washington seems to make sense there for him. And again, it's that similar message to the California guys. Why go to Tennessee? Why go to Georgia? Why go to Florida when you can stay on the West Coast, play in the Big Ten, play those same teams that you want to play against, end up in the college football playoff? The NIL resources are fine, people. Like that, you have all the reasons here to stay on the West Coast and specifically at Washington. And Wilder's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Where those are all fantastic reasons of, off-field and competition development, all those things like that. I look at him on the field and I say, this guy has very quickly become one of my favorite players to watch on film in this class. And it's because he's just such a big, strong body on both the interior and the edge, where he's one of those guys where I look at, some of the installs that we saw from Ryan Walters today at practice. And it was moving guys like Deshaun Lynch and X3 Alexander around the formation, 2 very different body types, right? But having them do some similar things. And it's creative. It's inventive. It's just finding ways to get players into advantageous situations for their skill set. And that's something that I think Khary Wilder would fit in really well with at Washington. It's just the fact that he is such a big, disruptive player with such a high motor. It's, you want to line that guy up at like a 5 tech, that's fine. But if you also want him to play a stand-up 9, you can find a way to make that work because he is that kind of productive player. And I think that's a lot of fun when I think about what this defensive line could look like. It's just finding ways to get more players like that in the system. And it's why when you and I talked about it yesterday, it's why I'm so just kind of hell-bent on Washington taking 5, 6, 7 defensive linemen in this class. It's because there are so many different ways that you can just reload that position and find a way to make it work moving forward. And the best example I can give in that is look at what Michigan did in the national championship game against a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. And, you referenced the NFL draft. We saw 2 of those guys go in the top 15, where if you take enough swings and you trust your development and your coaching staff, there are going to be ways for that to work out. So that's something that I think is really important as we talk about Anthony Jones, Derek Coleman-Bruson, Khary Wilder, Tetairoa McMillan is another guy you and I have both been very high on. The list goes on and on and on. And if you can find a way to create one assembly of talent like that, where, you can find ways to space it out where, hey, yeah, obviously, this guy rose to the top, so he's going to get on the field first. This guy might redshirt, and you can find ways to space it out through one class. There are a lot of different ways to find ways to make that work, and that's just really, really enticing in terms of the defensive line because that's so important in the Big Ten.
So as you're saying all that, it made me think, Jedd's just like us. Never wrong, just early. When he said in the 2025 class that, we want this to be the best recruiting class in the history of Washington, he wasn't necessarily, he was wrong in terms of it wasn't necessarily the top, but it was trending in that class. This year, when you talk about all the 4-star talent that you could just mention where T.I. should probably be a 4-star when all is said and done, if you're signing, let's call it 5 out of 7 of your defensive linemen are 4 stars and above, again, I'm just going to say 4-star and above. No, think about that's what it's like. Hey, you weren't wrong that you were, going to sign the best class, and because he said the next year, we should say the same thing again. Hey, I want to have the next highest class again. Never wrong, just early, and this is a prime example. And you can even look at, probably another position that we touched on a little bit earlier, which is like running back, where Brian Bonner, you already have Anthony Snorri as a 4-star, but we've seen Jedd likes to use a multitude of backs, different types of ways. Keep reloading that position. Don't just settle for one and say, you know what, if we need one, we'll pick one up in the portal. It's like, no. Jordan Washington should be developed 2, 3, 4 years in Washington. Jonah, 2, 3, 4 years with Jedd. Adam Muhammad, same thing. And you look at that's why the high school sell works versus when you don't go into the portal, you reap the rewards in high school.
Absolutely. Well, that's certainly a great point. I want to move on because another guy that we need to talk about where we sent out a little blast to our insiders about him. Check that out. The link is down in the description below, by the way, is Mason James, where this is a guy who you and I talked about how important it was that he decided to visit again and come up last weekend for a practice and just take all that in before his official visit on June 6th. And it just seems like Washington continues to trend in a really, really good spot for him. And it's something where you look at this class, right? And we've talked about Vance Spafford, who's coming on an unofficial visit this weekend. And I look at Mason James and what he brings to the table, and I say, that's one of those things where if you're able to find a way to secure a commitment from that guy, even potentially before his official visit, you can look at that and say, you're continuing the, just to bring it back to the theme of the segment, that just that momentum that you really want to see because you got that big time West Coast kid. And now you can continue to expand the footprint because you got a 4-star quarterback from New Jersey. And now it's, hey, we're going to go into the South and we're going to pull out a 4-star receiver. Like getting all of that and continuing to build and grow is one of the reasons that Kodi Greene is so important because, it's like what we talked about with Keeney Pepe, where we were wrong about, getting in the top 5. We were just, never wrong, just early. Wrong tackle. Right? You find a 5-star offensive tackle on the West Coast who, obviously played close to home, but you're able to start there and build your foundation there. And now you can expand out, which is such an important part of this. And Mason James is somebody who, 5'10", 5'11", 170, but the speed he plays with and the way he plays the game fits this offense so well. It's like when we talked to Audric Harris a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about how, the film that this coaching staff wants me to watch is Jacob Cowing and Giles Jackson. This is another guy who fits into that mold so, so well.
Exactly. I mean, it's one of those things where, I forgot who said it. It might have been Peter Schrager. Somebody was like, some NFL person said, when you look at receivers, it's like assembling a basketball team. You need all the different types. And while you mentioned the measurables, where it's like, he's a little undersized, again, per se undersized. But there's so many different ways you can use those type of guys, as we've seen in Jedd's offense, where you just mentioned the names, Jacob Cowing. But even there's a few others that I'm sure Jedd would throw an example at. And it's one of those situations where maybe we haven't necessarily seen it, on the field. Like they didn't have a ton of options to do that last season, but the downfield blocking, all those sorts of things. Like that's why when Jedd Fisch says it's a pro style system and you're a receiver and you want to play in that, it's, well, if you're an undersized guy, let's just say undersized because you're under 6 feet. I'm just saying that just for the example. Sure. Where if you could try to still make it to the NFL, you need to know how to block in the run game. Kevin Cummings it's one of the things like he emphasized with Kevin Greene, another similar kind of comp in that we're just in terms of height, where no matter what size you are, whether you're 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", or 5'11", 5'10", you can find a way to make an impact in this offense. We have plans for you as long as you can do all these things. And I think Mason James seems like a guy that can do all three.
Oh, I agree. And that's such an important part of just what this receiving core is, where you look at the one guy that is committed right now in Terrence Sarian, he fits that mold really well too, where he's, one of those little more undersized guys at 5'10", 170, but he plays with such great speed that you can find ways to create releases for him. And as you continue to coach him up, which is something we've seen Kevin Cummings do very, very well over the years, you can find ways to just move them all over the formation and put them into advantageous situations, which is something this coaching staff is really good at. And, at the end of the day, it all comes back to something that Jonah Coleman talked about, where he called this offense a Sunday offense when we talked to him today. And it's one of those things where that's what a lot of these NFL offenses do. They find their ways to get their best players the ball in situations that are advantageous to them, whether it be A.J. Brown. I'm just going to throw out a couple of names here that, most of them probably don't have anything to do with Jedd Fisch, whether it's A.J. Brown on a slant, whether it's sending Jamar Chase on a go route, whatever it might be, you just find ways to get your best player the ball. And I think that that's something that has sold Mason James on, Washington getting this far in his recruitment anyway, but just the development that they've been able to provide for so many receivers over the years that just fit that mold that he's in is something that's really important and shouldn't be understated at all. But Lars, we got so much we need to get to from practice 10, which was a little bit lighter, but there were still some big time takeaways. Right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel has given new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big, which is great news for me as I look for the Celtics to try to continue the series over the Orlando Magic. I still have them coming out of the East. I think they're ending up playing the Oklahoma City Thunder in the finals. I can check out futures, all that sort of stuff over on the FanDuel app. And you can't miss out either. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. So, Lars, we got a chance to talk to Adam Muhammad today, which was really wonderful. And it was great to get to talk to him. We got to talk to the running backs about pass pro, a bunch of different things like that. Jonah was really great when he said, yeah, I could take all you guys into the offense and teach it to you because that's something that I'm just that comfortable with it at this point in time. But that was all really awesome. The best quote of the day goes to Adam Muhammad. And on a day when Scotty Graham talks, I was very impressed by that because Scotty always just gives us just media gold, exactly what we're looking for. Adam said, I live my life by a four-letter phrase, LBGD. Look bummy, go dummy. And I thought that was awesome. It's so much fun to see because he's somebody who he just wants to get out on the field and he wants the ball. And getting to know him was a lot of fun. And I'm just so excited about this running back room. And getting a chance to talk to them was very, very valuable.
I was just hoping he would say I live my life a quarter mile at a time. Just, one of those, like, one carry at a time. We're just going to take it 4 yards in a cloud of dust, 5 yards in a cloud of dust. But really, it does kind of personify, like, that's the type of guy that Scotty Graham looks for. It's the type of character and player where a couple of practice, like about a week ago now, Jonah came over and, for peel back the curtain just a little bit, we usually kind of have a half circle that, we just wait for the coach. It's kind of assembly, almost like a barrier, if you will, a human barrier, if you will. It's kind of, hey, come and talk to us. But Jonah just kind of came up out of nowhere, put his hands behind his head. And it's almost like
he posted up and he said, "Are you guys waiting on me?"
Yeah, and it's like I was like, are you announcing your run for president? Like, it's just, but it's that type of high character, the type of fun kids where even if you talk to at an NIL event, he's just such a great kid. I remember meeting him when he was, I think he either 17 or just turned 18, and I was like, would never have guessed it. Would never. Also physically, would never have guessed it either. Like, that's a separate discussion. But then you look and think, like, from when we saw them last season to now this season, Jonah getting in shape, kind of just. Jonah seems even, another year comfortable, which is scarier to think because it's like, man, imagine Jonah behind an even more capable offensive line. Now I get to work with DeMond solely, no shot at will, but just, I feel like the amount of things you can unlock with those two and then throwing Adam in that mix and Scotty's just awesome.
Oh, absolutely. And so let's talk about that a little bit because that is something we saw today. And obviously we can't go into too many specifics about play calls and designs and different things like that. But we saw just some similar looking plays to what we saw last year when Will Rogers was on the goal line. We saw like a speed option sort of thing. And it's just a whole bunch of different variations of different plays like that is probably the only way to describe it. And I thought that was a lot of fun because, as you said, working with DeMond is so valuable in that regard because that's just exactly what this offense could use, where Jonah talked about feeling a lot faster and getting faster after dropping so much weight. And I look at what this offense could be It's something, it goes perfectly in one of the things that Scotty Graham said, where, if we want to run circles around you, we could put Jordan Washington in, or, we could put Adam Muhammad in. And then if we want to run through you, we have Jonah Coleman. We've got Julian McMahon. We can do that. And he talked about Jonah saying he's somebody who can also run around you. Talk about Quade Carr in that same light as well. We got to hear a little bit about him, even though he's not on campus just yet. And it's one of those things where this running back group is so much fun. And, as we think about what Ohio State did on their run to the national championship last year, it was built on just obviously having a super stacked roster all around, but they had such a great running game. And it wasn't just one guy, right? Like I think back to 2023, and it was unfortunate that Cam Davis tore his ACL because things might have looked a little bit different, but everything just fell on the shoulders of Dylan Johnson, which he was incredible. I'm certainly not going to sit here and deny that, but having somebody else to work off of is so important, and seeing what that could look like, we talked about what that could look like down the line with Adam and Jordan Washington and, Ansu Sanoe in that mix. Maybe you find a way to add Brian Bonner to that as well. But having a 2-3-headed monster running back plus DeMond Williams and a mobile quarterback, it all is just such an exciting thought for this offense.
I mean, you don't have to say it, but I will. That's what I was writing down in my notes just to bookmark this for when we get to it. Guarantee you 100% Jedd calls that speed option one more time against Wazoo in the Apple Cup this coming season. But this time it's with the Mon and it actually works. And it's like, see, that was the intent, But it's like, again, that's why you can throw DeMond. Anyway, but the long story short is where that was the foundational piece where a lot of the same things that we saw last season, you're going to see this season, but it's going to be refined. It's going to be crisp. And then from that, you can evolve off of it and, adding in, a bigger Jordan Washington, like you mentioned. Justice Williams, where does he fit into this? Kevin Greene, how does he fit into this offense? Where all those pieces were there last season, but weren't there because they couldn't get on the field for one reason or another. And that's not, again, to slight any of those kids, but it's just, now that they're back healthy, where, it's almost like you just kind of want to shut it down right now. You don't even get to the spring game. And just like, you know what? Open it back up like August 20th, right? A couple weeks before the start of the season. Make sure everyone stays healthy, and then we'll run it from there. Because, by the way, I guarantee you that's what Jedd would want. Like, he would want enough to where it's like, hey, you know what? That's because those times when you lose the players to injury, it's when the times it's just so random and a freak practice incident. It's exactly what happened to Kevin Greene. Well, all these pieces are there last season, so it's just how can Jedd expand on it? We've seen it in a little bit of practice, which we can't fully dive into. But I think the foundational piece that DeMond had last season, like the ceiling with DeMond is just off the charts.
Absolutely. That's certainly a big part of it. A couple other things I want to dive into where this is just more of a note that I put a little bit out on Twitter about it, but we've referenced the NFL draft a couple of times as we're, recording this during the first round of the draft. One thing that was really cool was, we heard a couple of guys like just spewing out news like, well, oh yeah, Cam Ward went 1, and some people were shocked that Colston Loveland went 10. But one of the big things was we're sitting there, we're talking to Scotty Graham, and you could just hear Jedd Fisch in the background just yell to Jonah Coleman first. Just, hey, Jonah, he went number 8. And he's talking about Tetairoa McMillan, wide receiver from Arizona, went to the Carolina Panthers, and you could tell that Jonah Coleman was really happy for him. Ephesians Prysock, Kario Davis also seemed to really get a kick out of that. And it's really cool to just see, you talk about the high character and what it means to a lot of these guys to see their teammates succeed. And just to know that, hey, yeah, this NFL system that Jedd bought into, that I'm sure some fans are sitting there and saying, yeah, we got to see it play out. We got to see what this looks like. But just seeing what, the results for these guys in year 3, for Jonah in year 4, just saying, yeah, it paid off for those guys. And that's so cool to see. And I'm so proud of, my teammate, my friend, for doing all that. It was just a really awesome moment to me.
And it really brings the full recruiting style home to kind of tie this whole segment together, where you're talking about Jedd being able to say, I met Jonah when he was in high school. I am now meeting him when he's getting drafted in the NFL. I developed him for 5 consecutive years, by the way, with his same running back coach, Kodi Greene, and all that. But you look down the list, like Jonah Sabaena. That's why it's easier to go into a high school kid's home and say, hey, you know what, Kodi Greene, I can develop you at Washington just like I developed, Jonah and Morgan and all those other guys at Arizona, and, trying to do here with Pocky, and, the list goes on down there. But you just look at it and say, I can show you the proof of concept all the way to, the final product, because I've done it multiple times in. That's why I want to build through the high school ranks. And when you look and say, like Jonah being able to share that moment, you don't have that same moment if, and this is, again, not necessarily a negative for those guys that do come in, but like, Carver's not going to have that same reaction to McMillan getting drafted because he didn't know him. But it's
sure.
That's why, like, you can have stopgaps. And by the way, that's just not a shot at Carter. I'm just kind of using him as an example of a guy who you didn't play with him, you didn't know him as well. But again, you're surely happy for him. But when you actually have those guys for 2, 3, 4 years at the same height, from high school all the way to when you go off to the NFL, that's where those bonds and relationships come into play, where you can come back to practice and say, hey, you know what? Oh, you're getting recruited by Jedd. Oh, yeah, he was great. Like when I was in high school, this and that, and then he coached me up and yada, yada, yada. Those guys, when they come back to practice, that's the benefit of it all. That's where the sell, because anybody can sell the NFL. Like, hey, I mean, Bill Belichick is going to try that right now, right?
Sure.
Coming into college for the first time. Anybody can sell the NFL. It's one thing to say it. It's another thing to actually show it. Jedd's shown it time and time again.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all the viewers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.